In today's lecture, we're going to be looking at the prehistoric Aegean. Up until now, we've dealt with civilizations such as Egypt and the Middle East, particularly that of Mesopotamia. Those are very much landlocked cultures or civilizations. But today we're looking at a civilization that relies heavily upon the sea. We'll look at three distinct areas of the Mediterranean: the Cycladic Islands, where we find the Cycladic culture, the island of Crete, where we have the Minoans, and then the Greek mainland, or what's going to become the Greek mainland. During this chapter, this is where the Mycenaean culture is based. So here's the Aegean Sea. The area over here is the Greek mainland. The area toward the center of the map, Cycladic Islands, and down below that, the island of Crete. When we look at religion in these civilizations, it's totally different than that of earlier chapters. We don't really have any ruins of temples. We don't, or at least we haven't found any religious artifacts that we can say, absolutely, these were used for religious purposes. Both the Cycladic Islands and the island of Crete, very peaceful civilizations, even though they did have a very extensive navy. But when we get to the Mycenaeans on the Greek mainland, they are an extremely aggressive culture, and we can find that in really the architecture and the artifacts that were found in the graves. So let's take a look at the Cycladic Islands. And we're looking at here the island of Thera, which today we call Santorini. And of course, it's one of those beautiful vacation destinations we all want to go to. But around 1400 BC, this was an island that was literally torn apart by both volcanic activity and earthquakes. On this island and other islands in the Cycladic region, we've got these really great figures that are made out of marble. And that's exciting because this is the first time marble is used as a sculptural medium. Marble is something that is native to this part of the world and would have been very commonly used. Marble is used with the subtractive process. We take a block of marble and reduce it in size through carving. We chip and gouge and hammer away until that desired form is achieved. Now these Cycladic figures, they've been found ranging in size from 12 inches all the way up to 5 feet. Their heads are tilted back, their arms folded in front of them, and their toes pointed. So these could not have stood upright, they were laying down. In fact, we associate them with perhaps grave markers or even mimicking the people who were buried. Most of the figures, though, that were found are female. And they're somewhat similar in terms of not only look, but also function to the figures that were unearthed at Ain Ghazal. And perhaps they even inspired or informed the modernist sculptors of the early 20th century. People like Brancusi, who you see his work there off to the right. The forms are abstracted, and the term abstraction basically means that we've taken an object and we've distorted it somehow. Usually what happens is we take curvilinear lines and make them straight, make them into rectilinear lines. And the figural forms are divided up into more geometric equivalents. So, for instance, the face here is very much triangular in form. And the arms and elbows very much at 90-degree angles and straight lines. A couple really cool sculptures that were found are these harp players. And they're really interesting to me because we have an incorporation of negative space. When we look back at the chapter on Egypt, we had the sculpture of Menkari and his wife. We had the enthroned coffre as well. Very positive, massive sculptures. Positive in that there's no negative space, there's no empty space where air would flow. Even between the bodies on the sculpture of Menkari and his wife, very, very solid. A lot of that was because of the material. Marble is much softer, much easier to carve than diorite or anthracite. So when we look at this area here, you can see how free the arms are from the body and this nice opening where the harp is. We also have some space between the legs and the chair, and also the space underneath the chair is considered negative space. So let's move south to the island of Crete. And here is the island itself. It is 150 feet long and about 150 miles long and about 36 miles wide. We're mostly concerned up at the very northern part is where we're going to find the palace at Knossos. The people who lived on this island are really somewhat of a mystery. We don't know what happened to them. They inhabited the island anywhere from 6,000 to 5,000 BC, all the way up to a very abrupt ending around 1450 BC. This may have been caused by volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, conquests from the Greek mainland. We do know that many of these people ended up moving to the Greek mainland, whether they wanted to or by force, because we see very much a similarity in the artwork formed after 1450 BC on the Greek mainland to what we find on Crete before that time period. These people were, for instance, extremely gifted metal workers. The discoverer of the palace at Knossos is Sir Arthur Evans. And the palace at Knossos looks very much like that of Persepolis from the earlier chapter. And it did serve also as an administrative and commercial center. It even had a theater and performance area. Now the palace was rebuilt, the original one destroyed around 2000 BC, and a new palace erected on the same site, finished around 1700 BC, covering 6 acres. It was bigger, better light and air circulation, and perhaps even had basic plumbing. It was constructed from mud brick, and we've seen this medium used before in the civilizations of the Near East. But this was also dressed on the outside, perhaps a veneer or facade on the exterior walls. The columns were also made from wood, which gives much better than mud brick, for instance, in an earthquake. Below the palace at Knossos, this is where the Minotaur had allegedly lived, something that was half man and half bull. And I'll post a link to the Minotaur story or legend. Frescoes have been found in various rooms of the complex, and I'll show you one in particular called bull jumping in just a little bit. But when we look at the palace at Knossos and we recover this really fantastic pottery, pottery is something that was exported by these people. They were fantastic pottery makers, and these have been found as far away as Egypt, Syria, and Italy. Besides pottery, they exported wood, textiles, wine, and olive oil. They were also the very first literate society in Europe. We have Linear B writing dating back roughly 1900 to 1700 BC. And here's a reconstruction of what we think the palace originally looked like. And you can see this painting over here would have been done in fresco, and I'll tell you about that medium in just a minute. So this is the bull jumping image, or what they call the Toreador fresco. It's the first time that we have fresco as a painting medium, and it's really unique. The Toreador fresco recounts perhaps a rite of passage for young men. You would have one of your friends, for instance, holding the bull's horns here, while you would catapult yourself over the bull, and your other friend over at the right-hand side would catch you. There's been some theories saying that this is actually the same figure, grabbing the bull's horns, catapulting himself over the bull, and then standing after the jump. Bulls on the island of Crete were sacred animals, and they were regularly sacrificed on outdoor altars. Here's how it would have looked on the wall. And I want to talk about fresco painting because this is something that we're going to see throughout the rest of the ancient civilizations, and particularly when we get to the Italian Renaissance in the 1300s. This is one of the main mediums used. The name itself, fresco, comes from the Italian word for fresh, and it refers to painting onto wet plaster walls. The idea is that you or your assistants would prepare plaster in the morning, apply it to a wall, and then you would paint into the plaster. When the plaster dries, the paint becomes part of the wall, and it lasts for as long as the wall does. The pigment that you use is liquefied. It's combined with lime water. The bad part is not all pigments are water soluble, so you have a little bit of a limited palette when you use fresco painting. Fresco is done in the summer months so that the plaster will dry correctly. And with any other type of painting, we work from the top down to prevent dripping on already finished sections. And a full-size figure, that's going to take about 2 days to paint, so fresco painting is rather slow. Here we can see Michelangelo's altar wall on the Sistine Chapel. The painting at the left is, the picture there is taken before the cleaning, image at the right after the cleaning. So you can see what roughly 400 years of dirt looks like. Now we have safety concerns because when you're up on a scaffold, as an artist we normally want to step back and take a look at our works. Michelangelo actually fell from one of the scaffolding when he was working on the altar wall. He was okay, he survived and was just fine. But the image at the left by Barna de Siena, which is of the crucifixion, he fell during the construction of this painting, this fresco, and he died. The ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, again, completely fresco, which is why the paint looks so fresh. Once all the dirt was cleared away, the paint is part of the wall. It's sealed inside the surface. So again, it's going to last and look as beautiful until the ceiling is destroyed. There's also a term that you'll need to know called fresco secco, and this is painting on dried plaster. One of the reasons that The Last Supper by Da Vinci is in such a state of disrepair is Da Vinci painted this on the surface of the plaster rather than a true wet fresco painting. He wasn't asked to paint a true fresco, and I think if he had known how important this painting would have been, he would have done it that way to preserve it. But this is a painting that is done on dried plaster. And with that, we'll stop this presentation and we'll go on to the second part.